Hey guys, SpongeBob's here. What's up? Open up news. We got another thing from Nick Smart himself, the creator of the game, the Big Bubble Louie, Big Booey, Big Boss, Big Nick. He is the biggest Nick around. He's a smart man. Okay, I'll stop reading off. I'm planning a system with 3 tiers of awards called something like Combat Merits, Combat Distinctions, and Valorous Combat Awards. You earn combat merits by engaging in battles with larger enemy forces and dealing more damage than you sustain. Combat merits allow you to summon allies into fights or summon enemies into fights, taunting them with your combat history. They want to fight you. Combat distinctions are earned by defeating taunted enemies in combat. If you spend 50 combat merits inviting a Scarlet Dawn unit into your next fight, and you win, you get 5 combat distinctions. Combat distinctions can be spent upgrading your forces to mercenary status. These improved units can be brought into any faction or faction fight. When the fights begin, they teleport to the scene of what you want them to. Winning these fights earns you loot, as usual, and valorous combat awards. All 3 tiers of awards can be spent on other things. Most notably, you could spend valorous combat awards to change faction relations with any other faction, creating war or peace. Combat ammo resupplies can also be bought with combat distinctions. Perhaps some other stuff like exchanging for materials. The idea is that this will encourage small fleets and difficult fights, allow 8-way fights, allow mercenaries to change the course of faction-on-faction warfare, and allow meaningful diplomacy changes. Using mercenaries to help allies will also alter diplomacy. Mercenaries will also not be able to engage in a fight or be engaged in a fight, but also be hired out to other factions or join faction-on-faction battles. This means that it slims down the player core fleet to avoid snowballing. Basically, renting out your units to factions, forcing them to turn core forces into mercenaries to get valorous combat awards. In localized resource mode, mercenaries that teleport half the world away to engage in a fight will need to trek home to deposit their material loot back into the economy. Centralized mode, they won't need to do that, of course. And finally, the enemies and allies you summon into battle will be summoned from existing faction fleets so that you can use the system to help you slim down the number of allied and enemy fleets that exist on the map. So if you continuously summon Onyx Watch units as allies, it will affect their performance in the war with their enemies. Summoned allies and enemies will be split into a new fleet and will be in the combat location after the battle ends, meaning you need to be a bit careful who you taunt into combat, as they would wipe your territory if you lose the battle. The other changes to campaign are to remove garrison locations and just have roaming fleets under the control of a much smaller and more interesting AI mastermind. This will force factions to fight other factions. And finally, we need to do something about boarding and capturing and loot from that. What do you think of this proposal? I'll let you guys kind of soak that in for a little bit. This is interesting. I think this is redundant. I think we already have a system in place to accomplish all of this. So I'm going to preface this by saying I think one problem From the Depths is no feature ever gets developed enough, in that we always add new features to From the Depths, and we always get excited about new features, but none of them ever get developed. They're all surface level. None of them get their roots grained into the game. And by that, I'm going to talk about the RPG system in the game. If you don't know, each player has a level. I think in-game, if you see any of my campaign play videos, I'm like level 500, 30, something like that. So I have 500 player points. And if you don't know, in the game, you can allocate those to, better resource gathering, faster air units, faster sea units, faster missiles, less ammo expenditure. And so it's already a little bit like these combat merits that would give you bonuses. Now, let's kind of go down it step by step. Combat merits allow you to summon allies into fights or summon enemies into fights by taunting them. Now, the idea kind of ties down into the end here. I believe it's this paragraph, and a little bit up here. These fleets that are planned on being spawned in are all supposed to be physical. As in, when you spawn them on the map, they have to come from somewhere. And so you would be spawning mercenary units that are on the map. You would designate, let's say, a fleet of your own forces as mercenary units that you could buy back into a fight or lease out to other factions for, I guess, money or favor in diplomacy. We had a diplomacy system in the game, but it was removed because it was easy to cheese. You would just peace with all your factions and then farm resources forever, and that's basically you win the game. It's the From the Depths equivalent of digging 3 meters dirt into the ground and then covering up the top, and you win Minecraft like that. But basically, it's kind of cool having this change kind of planned for the new AIs, campaign AI, because it would basically be like if there's a fleet nearby, an allied fleet nearby, or an enemy fleet nearby, they could get pulled into the fight. And the farther a range they get pulled is dependent on how much renown, how much like Mountain Blade renown you have, how much they want to fight you, how much reputation you have, which is cool, but it would be even better if you just did this naturally by having localized fights, like I was ranting about a few videos ago. We even talked about it in the Rambot Roundtable podcast. We were talking about localized fights. A lot of people seem to like that idea, actually, and this would kind of be a natural way of doing this. It would be kind of cool. You could just ask your allies to go in. It's a little more like Mountain Blade, actually, and I don't think it would be a bad thing to be a little more like Mountain Blade, because it has a combat system that would work very well for From the Depths, since this is kind of a combination of a real-time strategy arena and an open-world exploration game. It's a little bit of both. Going back into this, combat distinctions are earned by defeating taunted enemies in combat. So if you spend 50 combat merits inviting a Scarlet Dawn merit, okay, shortening that since we already read it, if you defeat higher level enemies, you get more experience. Going back to the leveling system, I think we should just go by experience, because it works. You already have player experience, except the difference is to make this more of a per campaign basis, per instance basis, per multiplayer session basis, per game basis, per save game basis, whatever you want to call it. For every save game you have, for every new adventure you start, your level should reset to 0. Not saying you should never keep any of your level progress. Maybe there should be an option to play with your global level or with a new player level so that you can start a new adventure, so that you have to earn that experience further. To put it in like Dungeons and Dragons terms, it would be starting a level 1 character and then leveling up from there, not starting at like a level 14 character and already having a bunch of combat multipliers. It kind of it makes every game a challenge to you. Now, all 3 tiers of rewards can be spent on other things. You can change faction relationships with any other faction. We already had diplomacy in game, and it was very easy to cheese because, again, you can make everything go to peace with every other thing, and then you would be at peace with everything else. Maybe a way of doing this is if you're at peace with one faction, you're automatically at war with another faction. So there's no way of being completely at peace with everything. And if you do manage to wipe out all the factions that you're always at war with and you're in constant peace, maybe you have a game win because you've achieved world diplomacy. Or maybe one of the AIs just says, nah, screw it, I want world domination. It just declares war on you anyway. I don't know, maybe either or, some way of keeping the pace going. Just reflecting on it. The idea is that this will encourage small fleets and difficult fights, allow 8-way fights, allow mercenaries to change the course of faction on faction warfare, and allow meaningful diplomacy changes. Now, to encourage small fleets, I don't think this would be a way to encourage small fleets. It's kind of weird. And why should you be encouraging small fleets? What do you mean by small fleets? Just individual fleets or your entire force? I get what Nick's saying, where it would encourage less units, because if you sacrifice some of your units towards mercenarianism, if you sacrifice some of your units to be I'm talking too fast, I apologize. If you sacrifice some of your units to being mercenaries or into diplomacy, I can see how it would be a benefit to you, but I don't think it would really benefit you too much in the long run, especially if you're trying to wipe out every faction or speedrun it or similar. Mercenaries will not be able to engage in a fight or be engaged in a fight, but only be hired out to other factions. So you're basically renting out your units to other factions. It's kind of cool, kind of like Spore, actually, where you put the player-created creations into the campaign. It would be kind of cool if that reflected as in, like, some good campaigns were just, like... I mean, not campaigns. Some good units were just in the From the Depths campaign. and just had like a flag on them. I actually really like the idea of putting the same unit in multiple factions, just with different levels of tech or different levels of or different colors, because it would show that not every faction is completely different. They all have kind of some similarities to them. Like in the lore, the Steel Striders are supposed to have sold a bunch of units to the several factions, including the Deepwater Guard, and which kind of makes sense to have multiple levels of amounts of units and to have different difficulties of units in different factions. I don't know. I'm kind of going on a tangent, but in localized resource mode, okay, so I think all of this really talks about what we said earlier, where all the mercenaries will pull from a local area on the map, and they have to physically be there. So if there aren't physically any mercenaries on the map, you won't physically have one. There has to, like, if you say don't have any personal player mercenaries on the map and you hire mercenaries from Onyx Watch, there would have to be an Onyx Watch fleet on the map available, and you would use that fleet in your fight as your mercenaries. So that's pretty cool. Removing garrison locations, I actually think garrison locations are really cool, and I don't think they're a bad thing in the game. I think they're a cool thing, and I think it's something that maybe FTD should keep, because I kind of like the idea of if you... Sorry, the sniffles are attacking me. I kind of like the idea of if you make every battle localized around the individual terrain squares you have designated in From the Depths, you can make it like a strategic way to enter each square, or like some entrances are more heavily guarded than others. And making garrisons makes it so that each square is more like a little level. And if you don't reinforce the square yourself, or if you have to go all the way back to base and you don't have like forward resupply, the enemies can just come in and rebuild over that square. And every difficulty level could have more units in that square. I think it'd be an easy way to design the game around set defenses, and combining that with the new AI system of patrols would be great. Patrols and garrisons together would be amazing, because one, you would have the dynamic combat patrols that would go in and out and fulfill AI campaign missions. And then you would also have the garrisons that would be in place so that if you want to move forward in the campaign, you have to basically beat the levels, and each square would be a level. I don't know, that's something that in my perfect FTD, if I were to run it, I would focus on putting in localized battles like that, because I think all of these systems and game balance, like the Draba missile change to health recently, and this would all make sense if they did the removing ammo regen and then made localized battles. It just makes sense for FTD's vision, like what they want FTD to be. It just feels like it's so close but so far. But anyway, like Nick says, what do you guys think of this proposal? I'm honestly like I'm against combat distinctions in general. I think you should focus on the actual RPG leveling system and just flesh that out more, because it could serve this purpose and more. You can make it so that you can make bigger units with the RPG system, so that bigger units are more effective. Maybe like make a ability to make blocks cheaper, or make one that makes smaller units better, or you could have more units, something like that, so that you choose between buffing your weapons to make stronger units, or having more units to swarm out, or just having larger units. You know, something like that, something that just comes naturally from the game instead of kind of being forced by, I'm not going to call these microtransactions, but whatever they are, combat merits. You just purchase them essentially through gameplay. It doesn't feel natural. You could accomplish this with the other systems in game if you flesh them out. Anyway, it's a great suggestion though, Nick. I really like it. Thank you so much for putting the time and the effort to talk to the community about this. What do you guys think? Talk about it in the comments. If you're one of the guys on From the Depths official Discord that kind of just shoots down these ideas, remember, these aren't my ideas. I'm just talking about the devs' ideas. So talk about it with us. If you feel like I'm wrong and that these are great ideas, say it, because there might be like 40 people that agree with you, and they might like your comment, and then, you know, I could just talk about it later and be like, hey guys, I was wrong. I got in the game. I see your point. You know, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed and found this useful, and I hope to see what you guys think of these possible changes to the game or suggestions that Nick wants to put and throw in. If you guys want to throw any suggestions to Nick, there is a request tracker from the devs. Feel free to throw things up on there or just throw them in the comment here. I'm sure he'll check them. And if not, I might sum things up and send it to him personally. But anyway, guys, I hope you all enjoyed and found this useful, and please have a buoyant day. I feel like I've said that like 5 times this video, but you know.